Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, 4 IDF soldiers killed in a drone strike and dozens of others wounded. Discovery of an underground Hezbollah command center loaded with weapons 1 mile from Israel's border. And the 1988 Hamas charter detailing clear intent to annihilate the state of Israel. Plus, the Jerusalem prayer breakfast taking place at the end of October in Copenhagen. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl. In one of the worst attacks since the war began, a Hezbollah drone struck an IDF base this week, killing 4 soldiers and wounding dozens more. This comes as the U.S. announced it's sending an advanced missile defense system to help protect Israel from Iran. And more evidence has emerged that Hezbollah was planning a large-scale attack from Lebanon into the Galilee. Here's the latest. A drone strike at a base dozens of miles inside Israel killed 4 IDF soldiers and wounded 58 others Sunday evening. Ambulances rushed to the scene to treat the wounded and take them to hospitals.
It was a difficult scene. The impact of the drone strike caused serious injuries due to the blast and shrapnel.
The drone reportedly hit a base cafeteria at dinner time and exploded without any warning siren to alert the troops inside.
We will investigate how a UAV can breach without warning and hit a base.
After this devastating blow and following Iran's recent attack with 181 ballistic missiles, the announcement that the U.S. has sent an advanced air defense system is welcome news in Israel. Along with it come 100 U.S. troops to operate this complex machinery. One such battery can knock down 72 ballistic missiles. Asked why he's sending the battery, President Joe Biden answered simply,
"Defend Israel."
The threat is not only from the air, but underground as well. In southern Lebanon, IDF leaders showed reporters the tunnels where Hezbollah terrorists could prep unseen for a hidden invasion of Israel just across the border. The homes in the villages closest to the border were filled with weapons and connected to many terrorist tunnels.
What characterizes these places is that each and every one of them is a military target and an underground outpost with many tunnels.
Defense Minister Gallant says once Israel has cleared out Hezbollah, they won't let the terrorists back in, so more than 60,000 Israelis can safely return to their homes near the border. In 2006, the United Nations guaranteed its UNIFIL peacekeepers would make sure Hezbollah didn't pour into southern Lebanon and threaten Israel with terrorists and missiles. Instead, Hezbollah has established a military infrastructure there with weapons, troops, and tunnels. Some of those underground passages are just yards away from UNIFIL bases. After Israeli strikes against Hezbollah targets wounded nearby UNIFIL peacekeepers, 40 nations that sent peacekeepers are complaining against Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu says their anger is misplaced.
Instead of criticizing Israel, they should direct their criticism to Hezbollah, which uses UNIFIL as a human shield.
And he has a message for the UN Secretary General. Immediately get the UNIFIL forces out of harm's way. The IDF is revealing a massive underground command center it discovered in southern Lebanon, a stronghold to launch a surprise attack on Israel by Hezbollah's most elite fighters.
Do a raid into Israel and do a larger scale of massacre than the 7th of October. They were planned with the motorcycles here to go to Kiryat Shmona, to Iftach, to villages and positions inside Israel and conduct a massacre.
The command center is located under a Lebanese house a little over a mile from the border with Israel. The bunker and tunnel system were loaded with weapons and facilities where Hezbollah terrorists could either launch out or hunker down, which they apparently were doing very recently.
They were only here a couple of days ago, in those beds with those weapons here.
Israeli leaders paid respects to those lost in Sunday's deadly drone strike at an IDF base. Israel's top general, its defense minister, and prime minister all on hand. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said this brutal assault that killed 4 and wounded more than 60 won't deter Israel from carrying out its war on Hezbollah.
I want to make it clear, we will continue to hit Hezbollah without mercy in all parts of Lebanon, as well as in Beirut.
The funeral for Sergeant Amitai Alon, one of the 4 soldiers killed, was held Monday. His mother, Hagit, wept next to her son's coffin.
It feels like our heart was ripped out.
As Israel considers its retaliatory strike against Iran, Israel reportedly has promised the U.S. that it won't hit any nuclear or oil production facilities. U.S. officials tell the Wall Street Journal the strike will likely hit military and intelligence targets. It's expected to take place before the November 5th elections. In response to the news that the U.S. is sending a missile defense system and about 100 troops to operate the system, Iran has reportedly cut off communications with the U.S. and is making accusations of escalating the conflict.
We do not want war, although we are fully prepared for it.
Meanwhile, European Union nations are angry with Israel after strikes on Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon wounded UN peacekeepers nearby. Netanyahu says charges that Israel deliberately attacked the peacekeepers are false. He claims Hezbollah deliberately fires rockets near UN positions, and Israel has repeatedly warned UN peacekeepers to pull back and get out of harm's way.
Hezbollah uses UNIFIL facilities and positions as cover while it attacks Israeli cities and communities.
The October 7th massacre may have been 1 year ago, but the country is still reeling from the realities it exposed about the nature of the terror group Hamas. The ideological roots of Hamas massacre are found inside the group's charter. As CBN's Dale Hurd explains, the document is the terror group's blueprint for the ultimate destruction of Israel.
No one who has read the Hamas charter should be surprised by the slaughter that took place October 7. Created at the terror group's founding, it states that Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it.
Genocide of Jews.
Jonathan Conricus is a former IDF spokesman and a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies.
The Hamas charter it is a charter to perform genocide against Israelis and to annihilate the state of Israel as we know it.
It's full of references to the destruction of Israel.
Hillel Frisch is a senior researcher at the Jerusalem Institute for Security and Strategy.
The document has one very specific purpose, and that is to call for the destruction of the state of Israel, to organize all Muslims for that purpose, and create a military terrorist force.
An offshoot of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, the name Hamas is an Arabic acronym for Islamic Resistance Movement. Its original charter reads like something written in Nazi Germany. Article 22 says of Jews, with their money they took control of the world media, news agencies, the press, publishing houses, broadcasting stations, and others. The document blames Jews for the French and Communist revolutions, World Wars I and II, and states Jews created the United Nations to enable them to rule the world. There is no war going on anywhere, the document reads, without having Jews' finger in it. The charter even blames Jews for the creation of the Rotary and Lions clubs, which Hamas apparently sees as sinister forces. The document also quotes from the Quran and from a Muslim hadith. The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Then the Jews will hide behind rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will cry out, "O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him." Hamas issued a revised charter in 2017, which softened some of the original's violent and anti-Semitic rhetoric. However, Conricus says the October 7th massacre exposed the revised charter as a fraud.
All that was a smokescreen, and Hamas very cleverly misled Israeli decision makers until they revealed what their real intentions were, and they did that on October the 7th.
Article 13 in the original charter rejects any negotiated settlement and says the only solution for the Palestinian question is jihad, holy war. Frisch says the dilemma over negotiating with Hamas is that it would likely allow the group to remain in power.
And within 2-3 years, they'll be exactly at the same point as they were on October 6th, the day before the slaughter.
Hopefully, in the future, there will be peace to be made with the Palestinians. Many Israelis want to make peace with the Palestinians. Israel has tried, but there's no peace to be made with Hamas.
That's because the Hamas charter forbids peace until Israel is destroyed. Dale Hurd's CBN News.
Up next, Down to the Wire, observations from CBN's David Brody on the presidential candidates and where they stand on policy related to Israel. With just over 3 weeks to go before Americans cast their ballots, voters and world leaders alike want to know how the presidential hopefuls will deal with a region on the brink of war. CBN chief political analyst David Brody reports.
Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are polar opposites in many ways, although it appears they agree on which country poses the greatest threat.
Which foreign country do you consider to be our greatest adversary?
I think there's an obvious one in mind, which is Iran. Iran has American blood on their hands, okay?
And that's likely where the common ground will end. In dealing with Iran, a Harris administration would be expected to follow the path of President Biden. Critics say that means easing up on sanctions and supporting an updated nuclear deal, something Trump abruptly exited as president.
Iran was broke under Donald Trump. Now Iran has $300 billion because they took off all the sanctions that I had.
Brent Sadler is with the Heritage Foundation.
Kamala Harris and the Biden-Harris White House the last 3.5, almost 4 years, their approach has been, if they can get a deal with Iran, everything else is possible. Trump, on the other hand, is from a position of strength, then meaningful negotiations are possible.
As for Israel, Trump has been clear that a two-state solution is not possible. Harris, however, has stated she will push for it around the clock. On continued U.S. support for the Jewish state, Trump says he would not put any condition on aid. Harris hasn't committed to that, and during her time as VP, the administration temporarily stopped some ammunition shipments to Israel.
The best predictor of what's going to happen is what somebody has done already.
Former career diplomat Bart McCoys says any question of funding Israel is a major issue.
She will strangle Israel. She'll have a policy of complete strangulation. They will have to develop allies outside the United States and sources for weapons outside the United States.
Then there is Gaza. Trump hasn't committed to exactly what help might be in store for the Palestinians, but as president, he cut hundreds of millions of dollars in aid intended for both the West Bank and Gaza. Harris, however, has a different view.
What has happened in Gaza over the past 9 months is devastating. We cannot look away in the face of these tragedies. We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent.
The ideology of this is that I think they, in their hearts, feel that Israel is the aggressor, the oppressor in this case, and that is the Palestinian cause that stands on higher moral ground. And that actually colors a lot of their policy decisions, and many of that are made outside of public vision, inside the White House and across the administration.
The candidates' Middle East policies will be one part of the jigsaw puzzle that voters will have to solve come Election Day. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Coming up, Regent University's New Israel Institute, bringing the study of Israel and Zionism to the U.S. In a move to counter the misinformation and anti-Semitism rampant in American academia, CBN's Regent University has launched a new initiative to teach the truth about Israel and its amazing impact on the world.
The Israel Institute was established to provide students in the world factual information and analysis about the Jewish state, and to help the next generation of Christians to deepen their knowledge of and engagement with the modern state of Israel. This milestone project will be led by Dr. A.J. Nolte. Nolte brings an extensive background and knowledge of world affairs, with more than 10 years of teaching on Israel and the contemporary Middle East. The Institute will also amplify Regent University's already firm commitment to Israel.
Well, Dr. A.J. Nolte is the director of Regent University's Israel Institute. He joins us now. So let me ask the first question. What's influencing universities to sort of flip the script, if you will, and teach negative views of Israel?
Thank you for having me. There are a number of factors. Probably the most important of them are money, ideology, and traditional anti-Semitism. So money is the first one. For years and decades now, countries that are hostile to Israel have been pouring hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into U.S. universities, often funding Middle East studies, often funding extension campuses for some of our elite universities. And that funding comes with strings attached. It comes with a mandate that some of that teaching is anti-Israel. But then we also have the impact of ideology, an ideology of intersectionality on the left that divides the world into oppressed and oppressors. And so what I would say we have on the universities is an alliance of that sort of ideological commitment with a lot of funding coming often from countries in the Middle East that are hostile to Israel and individuals in the Middle East that are hostile to Israel. And then, of course, we also have the amplification of that by social media. Social media algorithms are often displaying to younger folks, Gen Zs, information about Israel that is badly skewed toward a pro-Hamas perspective. I wouldn't even say pro-Palestinian, I'd say pro-Hamas perspective.
Well, how did the script flip? I mean, it's amazing to me to hear on college campuses that somehow Israel is the oppressor and it's a colonizer, and you know, here they are in the land of the patriarchs. They've come home, and how are they viewed as a colonizer?
The roots of this actually start in the 1960s and 1970s during the Cold War from the Soviet Union. So the Soviets were very concerned about their own Russian Jewish population, that they might sympathize with Israel and lean toward Zionism as opposed to Marxism-Leninism. And so they produced what they called anti-Zionist science that they then export around the world through the KGB, through other organs. And actually they were the driving force behind the Zionism is racism resolution at the UN, which was subsequently repealed. Over time, that kind of left-wing anti-Israel bias morphs as we start to see a new perspective called critical theory. And critical theory says people are either oppressors or oppressed, colonizers or colonized. And so because there was this pre-loaded narrative that said that Israel was illegitimate, didn't have a right to exist, and was a colonial power, it was slotted into that oppressor category. Never mind the fact that Israel was created in the wake of the worst crime against humanity in history, the Holocaust.
Well, how does, do you think the average student, let's just, you know, I'll pick Columbia. So they had probably the most visible protest with tents on campus. And then the president of Columbia famously called for the police to intervene, that the situation that had gotten out of control, use it's a clear and present danger language. Do you think the average student at Columbia understands the narrative and the source of these counter narratives?
No, I think there's a hardcore of activists that absolutely know what they're doing. They know the theories behind it. They know the ideologies behind it. I think you have a lot of other students that are there because they've seen things on social media. As I mentioned, if you look at TikTok, even Instagram, the filters and algorithms tend to skew toward that anti-Israel perspective. And then there's a lot of folks that are there just because they're curious, and you know, if they're chanting from the river to the sea, if you ask them to name the river and the sea, I'm not sure most of them can. And so there's those very different groups. And I would say at the Israel Institute, what we're hoping to do is get those persuadable elements that are, you know, kind of curious but don't really know that much, but all they've heard is one side, and get them some accurate information about the contemporary state of Israel.
Still ahead, European friends standing with Israel at the upcoming Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast in Copenhagen. For years, the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast has hosted events in which thousands of world leaders and influencers have networked and learned to engage with their governments on behalf of Israel. Director of the Prayer Breakfast, Albert Wexler, stopped by our studio recently to fill us in on the next Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast about to happen at the end of October in Copenhagen. You have been doing Jerusalem prayer breakfasts since 2017. Just tell us maybe a little bit about what is it and why you do it.
Well, it started in 2016 with Robert Ilatov, who was the chairman of the Christian Allies Caucus, then responsible for all the contacts of the Knesset with the Christian world, asked for my help. And I said, how can I help you? He said, we need to build another alliance of the Friends of Israel. I said, why? Because there are so many great organizations, Christian Embassy, Bridges for Peace, you name it, they are there, they're doing great work. He said, no, we need something that is ours. So Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast is initiated by the Knesset, and it's been rotating now since 2017 when we had the initial one. And several different Knesset members have been hosting it. And so we just had in May the 8th annual Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast here. And a month ago we had one in New York with 600 people from 30 nations coming to pray.
Wow, that's great. Now, your next one at the end of October is in Copenhagen. Much of Europe has not been very friendly to Israel. How is Denmark, and why are you having it there?
Julie, you see, Denmark has the history of standing with the Jews for the last 100 years. I mean, they were the ones who basically saved their Jewish population during the Holocaust. The king, Christian X, the legend said that he wore the Star of David. So we are literally doing this to encourage our Danish friends to continue standing with Israel as they become the presidents of the European Union Council. I mean, they will be leading the European Union in the second part of 2025, and they will be non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. Wow. So we need to strengthen a relationship, their covenant relationship with Israel in this very, very critical time. I don't know if you have realized, but European nations are preparing for a war, a nuclear war. Sweden, Finland, they have issued and printed booklets how to survive a war like this. Denmark has told their population to prepare for iodine and food and everything, because Russia is literally threatening these countries for giving F-16s to Ukraine. And so there's a time, really literally time, that the nations have to repent, have to strengthen their relationships with the Jewish people, with Israel. We've invited the king, because they have this tradition of standing with the Jewish people. Now, whether he comes, or the Queen Mother, or some of the princes, we would be happy to have people from the royal family. And of course, we have the youth mayor of Copenhagen welcoming the delegation. Member of Parliament Morten Messerschmidt, he is the one hosting the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast in Copenhagen. And of course, we have invited the pastors and leaders from all over Copenhagen. But people will come from Norway, from Finland, from Sweden, from Faroe Islands, Iceland, all of these places.
Very good. Thank you so much for joining us on Jerusalem Dateline. If you're interested in going to the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast in Copenhagen, the website for registering is JPB, which stands for Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast, CPH, which is for Copenhagen. So that's jpbcph.org. There's still time to register by October 31st. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Please continue to pray for Israel, for the hostages in captivity, for our IDF soldiers and all those caught in harm's way. And remember, the God who's watching over Israel and you and me neither slumbers nor sleeps. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.